Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into an emotion that, well, everyone feels, but maybe few truly understand. Anger.
Mm,
It's incredibly powerful, and honestly, it often gets a pretty bad rap.
it really does. And, how we understand it, how we handle it, that profoundly impacts our lives in every relationship we have, really.
Absolutely. And we're doing this deep dive using a really insightful document. It's called 10 Truths About Anger by Gary J. Oliver.
Right.
And it offers this framework that challenges some really common, often negative assumptions we tend to have about this feeling.
That's right. Our mission here
Yep.
in this deep dive is basically to unpack these 10 points from the source. We want to pull out the most important insights
Yeah.
and give you a clearer, maybe more helpful perspective on what anger actually is, where it genuinely comes from,
Okay.
and how it can be managed, not just squashed down potentially for
Yeah.
genuinely positive outcomes.
Okay, let's jump straight in then. The first truth the source lays out. Anger is a God-given emotion.
Yeah, this is such a foundational idea presented in the document. The core insight here is that anger isn't inherently bad. It's not something we shouldn't feel.
Mhm.
It's actually described as divinely given, even reflecting God's own image. So in its essence, it's designed for healthy purposes.
So it's not something to just get rid of. It actually has a purpose.
Exactly. And the source makes a really clear distinction between healthy, what it calls godly anger,
Okay.
and the ungodly, unhealthy, destructive kind that we often see.
How does it define that healthy kind, that godly anger? What does that actually look like?
Well, it's presented as a form of healthy anger that shows up very differently from what we typically think of, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind that moves us to put love into action,
Yeah.
especially, say, to defend the vulnerable or stand up against injustice.
Wow, that's a powerful reframing right there. Anger as a drive towards protection or putting love into action.
It really is. And you contrast that with the ungodly kind, which is all about using that energy to hurt people or harm them or objectify them.
Yeah.
And the source doesn't shy away from saying, look, there are situations where that godly anger is presented as the only truly appropriate response.
That really shifts the starting point, doesn't it? From anger is just negative to anger actually has potential.
Exactly.
Which brings us neatly to the second truth. Anger is a secondary emotion.
Right. This is where the source encourages us to look under the hood. Because while anger is often the first thing we see, right, the first emotion displayed.
Yeah, the most visible one.
Yeah. The core insight is that it's almost always an expression of something deeper going on, something underneath the surface.
It's like the smoke you see, but it's not the fire itself. Is that the idea?
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah. It's triggered by primary emotions that are hiding underneath.
Okay.
And the source specifically names these as hurt, frustration, and fear.
Hurt, frustration, and fear. And does the source suggest reasons why people might, show the anger instead of those deeper feelings?
It does, yeah. It points out that we might learn, maybe unconsciously, that anger can be a powerful tool for protection. Maybe by intimidating others, so we kind of lean into it. Or the flip side, the sheer energy of anger can feel overwhelming.
Sure.
So we might try to just stuff it down entirely. And it also notes that for some people, and it specifically mentions men here, anger might just feel more comfortable, maybe less vulnerable
Yeah, safer.
than expressing those primary emotions like hurt or fear.
Safer, exactly. So the critical takeaway from this truth is you absolutely have to look past the visible anger to figure out that underlying primary emotion.
It's essential, yeah. Without identifying that deeper feeling, you're really only dealing with the symptom, aren't you? Not the actual cause.
And building on that idea that anger is always signaling something deeper. The source moves to truth number 3. Anger is a signal.
And this truth uses some very relatable analogies, which is helpful.
Right.
Think of it like the screaming smoke detector going off. That's the anger. It's telling you there's a fire somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? Something much deeper happening.
Right.
Or maybe like a flashing light on your car dashboard. It signals a problem that needs attention underneath the hood.
So it's a warning light, basically, not the problem itself.
Precisely. If you pay attention to that signal, the source says you have the chance, the opportunity to respond in a healthy, considered way.
Okay.
But if you ignore the signal, or you just react to the signal itself without addressing the underlying issue, well, you're almost guaranteed to react immaturely, irresponsibly, unhealthily.
So the signal points to risk or danger, is that it?
Yes, essentially. It's a signal that you might be at danger or risk, and it's prompting you to identify that primary emotion the actual fire or the car problem so you can make a choice
Right.
about how to respond responsibly, rather than just having an automatic, often damaging reaction.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, shifting gears just a little bit, the source presents truth number 4. Anger is powerful.
Oh, yeah. And anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of intense, maybe misdirected anger knows just how true this is.
Hmm.
The sheer energy, the intensity, it can feel absolutely overwhelming, intimidating.
Yeah.
That power is just undeniable.
But the source talks about channeling that power constructively,
Right.
not just letting it run wild.
Yes, and this is a really key insight here. It suggests that a mature, healthy response to other people's unhealthy anger can actually involve expressing our own healthy anger.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so instead of the typical reactions like shutting down or retreating or maybe lashing out destructively,
Right.
the source says you can actually utilize that inherent power in constructive ways.
What kind of constructive uses does the source list? Can you give some examples?
Sure, it includes things like speaking truth directly but calmly,
Mm.
clarifying your concerns, genuinely seeking understanding from the other person,
Okay.
setting clear limits and boundaries, and actively inviting constructive conversations, aimed at actually
Okay.
resolving things.
So it's about taking that powerful energy and investing it towards clarity and building something, rather than just letting it explode or using it reactively to tear things down.
Exactly. That's the core point here. The same powerful energy can be either spent reactively and destructively, or it can be invested proactively in healthy, responsible ways that actually strengthen individuals and relationships
Oh.
by increasing understanding and resolving conflict.
Okay. Moving on, truth number 5 is that anger is the emotion most often mislabeled.
Yeah, anger is complex, isn't it? And it doesn't always present as, yelling or outward aggression.
Right.
The source highlights that it can express itself externally, sure, but it often masquerades internally. It can show up looking like anxiety or chronic worry or even depression or just apathy.
Huh. So someone who seems maybe anxious or just withdrawn might actually be struggling with unexpressed anger deep down.
Precisely. And the document also makes an interesting observation about sort of recent shifts. It notes that expressing grievance through unhealthy anger and outrage has become much more commonplace.
You see that a lot.
Yeah, even in communities where it was maybe historically suppressed.
Mm.
It touches on this idea that perhaps in the past, certain groups, like it mentions Christians specifically, felt less free to verbalize anger. The whole good Christians don't get angry idea. But that's definitely changing.
So the mislabeling can be both internal, like the person feeling it doesn't recognize it as anger, and external in how we judge others.
Yes, exactly. It's a misunderstanding both ways. And the powerful insight here is that when we really grasp that anger, it's frequently that secondary reaction, triggered by past hurt, present frustration, or future fear. It just opens up entirely new pathways
Yeah.
for making a positive difference in our relationships. Because you're addressing the actual root cause instead of just reacting to the surface emotion.
That leads us very naturally into truth number 6. Anger is the emotion most likely to be blamed.
Yeah, anger definitely has a poor reputation, doesn't it? Especially in certain circles, or maybe just when it makes people uncomfortable.
Sure.
When someone expresses unhealthy anger, it's incredibly easy to just quickly slap a label on them. Oh, he's just an angry person, or
Yeah.
that's just her anger talking.
It's a simple way to dismiss them, or dismiss the situation entirely.
It really is. And while unhealthy anger absolutely is a problem, it causes real harm.
Of course.
The source makes this critical point that it's usually not the only problem. And crucially, it's rarely the primary problem that's underlying the behavior.
So blaming the anger itself kind of lets everyone off the hook from dealing with whatever the deeper issue is.
That's exactly the dynamic described, yeah.
Yeah.
The document talks about how that cauldron of grievances fueled by anger might feel powerful to the person holding it, but it hurts everyone around them. And when others are intimidated, they often just avoid the deeper issues. It becomes easier for everyone involved, the person with the anger and those around them, to just dismiss it. Oh, it's no big deal. They're just angry.
Yeah, sweep it under the rug.
Exactly. But the source warns, look, there is significantly more going on beneath the surface. And if those underlying issues aren't identified and addressed, the situation will almost certainly just get worse.
Which brings us to a pretty stark reality in truth number 7. Mismanaged anger can be hazardous to your health.
Yeah. This section lists some pretty serious physical consequences pulled right from the source. It really stresses that chronically mismanaged anger isn't just emotionally draining.
Yeah.
It has tangible physical health impacts.
What are some of the specific health problems mentioned in the source?
Well, it links it to significant stress on the heart, potentially contributing to heart disease. It increases stress hormones like cortisol and keeps them elevated,
Oh, wow.
which has all sorts of cascading negative effects. It can raise the risk of type 2 diabetes, severely disrupt digestion, aggravate existing sleep problems, erode the ability to concentrate. It's even associated with increased risks in things like traffic accidents, just due to distraction.
Wow.
And it can foster this chronic state of cynicism and anxiety.
That's a long and really concerning list. And the source provides a specific perspective on depression here too, right?
It does. While acknowledging there are many potential causes for depression, the document offers a specific definition in this context. Anger turned inward.
Anger turned inward.
Yeah. It suggests this is perhaps the most prevalent cause it's discussing here. And this connects to the observation that people struggling with depression often neglect basic self-care.
Right.
Things like consistent healthy eating, getting sufficient sleep, or even just attending to physical health needs.
That paints a very clear picture of the cost, the real cost, of mishandling this powerful emotion. Let's look at truth number 8. Anger can help us set healthy limits and boundaries.
Yeah, this is another really powerful example of how anger, when understood correctly, can actually be a positive signal.
Okay.
The source defines limits as basically, this is as far as I'm willing to go or do, and boundaries as, this is as far as I'm willing for you to go.
Okay. Limits and boundaries. And why is setting those so important?
Well, the document is pretty clear on this. When we fail to set and enforce healthy limits and boundaries, we are essentially setting ourselves up for considerably more hurt and difficulty down the road, both for ourselves and potentially for the other person too.
So the feeling of anger itself can signal that maybe a limit or a boundary is needed in a particular situation?
Exactly. Since anger is described here as a reaction to a real or perceived threat.
Okay.
Whether that's a challenge to your values or someone demanding too much of your time or energy or maybe treating you with disrespect, that feeling provides an opportunity. It's a signal.
Right.
It prompts you to evaluate the situation and consider, okay, where does a line need to be drawn here or maybe reinforced?
And again, it comes back to understanding the deeper cause of that anger to help you set those limits effectively.
Yes, absolutely. By identifying that primary emotion underneath, the anger, the hurt, the fear, the frustration, you're then empowered to express that need for a limit or boundary in those healthy, mature, and responsible ways we talked about.
Yeah.
Ways that can make a tangible, positive difference for you and in your relationships, rather than just reacting impulsively.
Which transitions perfectly into truth number 9. Healthy anger is learned.
Yes. And this is the really hopeful part of the source's message, I think. Unhealthy reactive anger often comes naturally, right? It's kind of the default.
Yeah.
And it's frequently modeled for us, maybe unconsciously, by parents or caregivers or others in our environment who react in ways that, build walls instead of bridges.
So if we learn the unhelpful ways, does that mean we can actually learn a new way?
That's precisely the good news the source emphasizes, because unhealthy expressions of anger are largely reactive in learned behaviors. They are absolutely unlearnable.
Okay. That is hopeful.
Yeah. The document talks about the potential for actually rewiring our brain over time. With conscious effort, with practice, carving out entirely new neural pathways.
Wow.
And this allows us to shift from habitually reacting in maybe destructive ways to making a conscious choice to respond constructively.
It sounds like it really requires intentionality, though, to change that default setting.
It does, absolutely. And it circles right back to that earlier point about anger being secondary. Identifying that underlying fear or hurt or frustration is just fundamental to the whole process of learning how to respond with healthy, productive expressions of anger. Expressions that can truly have an incredibly positive impact on our own well-being and the health of our relationships.
And finally, the source concludes with truth number 10. Healthy anger enhances relationships.
Yeah, this really is the culmination, isn't it? It brings us full circle from that maybe initial idea that anger is simply a negative, destructive force.
Right.
Unmanaged, unhealthy anger is indeed described as crushing, confusing, trust-shattering.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the source argues that a healthy managed response to anger actually opens the door.
Opens the door to what?
To richer, deeper, more authentic conversations.
So it actually allows for honesty, even when it's difficult.
Exactly. The source posits that relationships, whether they're with partners or family members or close friends, they actually become stronger, more resilient. When the people involved can navigate disagreement and conflict without feeling the need to either win the fight or just completely escape the situation.
Yeah.
Healthy responses, it says, strip away that superficial harmony. They genuinely increase understanding between people, and they courageously encourage openness and vulnerability.
This is where that distinction between the feeling of anger and how you express it seems so critical.
It's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
The document is very clear. The simple feeling of anger itself doesn't inherently strengthen or weaken a relationship. It's the choice we make about how to express that feeling, whether we allow the emotion to control us and just prompt a reaction, or whether we choose to pause, understand, and respond thoughtfully. That's what ultimately builds or destroys the connection.
That's a profound distinction to make, really.
It really is. And the source wraps this point up by saying that when healthy anger is understood and expressed constructively, it can genuinely increase trust. It can lead to more effective communication, build deeper levels of intimacy.
Wow.
But it also notes, look, achieving this kind of transformation requires being focused on personal growth. It requires committing to honesty and bravery. And often, it involves having support from others.
Sure.
But it ends this section on a very hopeful note, stating that hope and healing for unhealthy anger are indeed available.
Wow. Stepping through those 10 truths like that really offers a fundamentally different perspective on anger, doesn't it?
It really does.
We've kind of moved from maybe seeing it as this purely negative force to understanding it as, well, potentially a divinely given signal, a secondary emotion pointing to deeper needs, a powerful energy that can be constructively invested, and ultimately, when understood and managed healthily, something that can actually strengthen our deepest relationships.
It's a powerful recalibration.
Yeah.
Shifting from simply wanting to suppress anger or blame it
Right.
to recognizing its complexity, its signals, and its incredible potential for positive impact when we learn to respond differently.
It is. And based on everything we've unpacked from this source material, well, here's a thought. If anger is always a signal of a deeper primary emotion, whether it's hurt, fear, or frustration, what might your own anger be genuinely trying to tell you?
That's the question worth exploring for sure.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, all the insights we discussed today were drawn from the document 10 Truths About Anger by Gary J. Oliver, THM, PhD, which connects to his book, Hope and Healing for Unhealthy Anger.
It really does offer a truly variable framework for engaging with this often avoided emotion in a much more constructive way.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.